Okay, welcome to the meeting, everybody. Welcome to the Resilient Waters meeting, all about flood control, infrastructure, and fish passage. Sorry, technical difficulties, right? There we go. So really glad you can make it today. Yeah, we're just really happy to have so many people here. Wow. I think we've got, what have we got? 27 participants now? Bingo. I'm hopping right in. So I just want to start by acknowledging that we are on the lands of the mainland Coast Salish peoples. I know this is kind of a strange time because we're all gathered on different traditional territories. And because of that, and I, for one, am an uninvited guest on these lands, what I'd like to do is ask you all to go into your Zoom chat box and take a moment to just enter in the names of the First Nations territories that you are sitting on right now into that chat box. If you can't find the chat box, it's at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And while you do that, I'd just like to talk about kind of this moment. Colonialism has left many First Nations particularly vulnerable to multiple overlapping crises that are happening, including the high flooding that is being projected for the Fraser River this year, the loss of salmon, and now COVID, which is disproportionately impacting Indigenous people due to systemic inequities in access and spending on basic health and human needs. And this can also trigger historical and ancestral trauma around how Canada has approached pandemics like this in the past. So I just want to reflect on the idea that for these and countless other reasons, it's particularly important that those of us that continue to benefit from colonialism are mindful and working towards helping and not perpetuating colonial practices. So it's my hope that this project, in some small ways, are helping to heal some of those wounds. I also wanted to acknowledge just kind of how strange these times are and how awkward this all is, and that this pandemic is affecting everybody in very different ways. Some of us might be excited about the possibilities of change that are coming, and some of us might be struggling just to get through another day, and some of us might be taking care of somebody that's very sick through this. So this is hitting us all in very different ways. So I'm just very appreciative that you're all taking time to spend with us today. I'd like to ask everyone just to be patient and kind to yourself and be kind to us and each other. And accept right now that we're probably going to have some weird technical difficulties today. I'll expect that you'll probably have some kids or some cats or some dogs running through your webcam at some point and distracting you, and that's okay. And do what you need to do. So with that, I'll just carry on to the next. I just wanted to share this quick quote from an article written by Arundhati Roy on April 3rd that I thought I want to use to just set a scene for our meeting today. So she writes, "We are at a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatred, our avarice, our databanks and dead ideas, our dead rivers and smoky skies behind us. Or we can walk through lightly, with little luggage, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it." So I just wanted to use that to set the scene for us today. The next part we have here is what I'd like you to do is go back to Slido and use one word to describe your river, creek, stream story. We're going to build a little word cloud out of it. So you have to go find your Slido window again. I know that's going to be So many windows. I have about 19 windows going on here. Nice, Peaceful is out to a strong lead here. Let's keep going. I want to wait until we've got at least up to 20 here. Well, yes, there we go. That's good. Dog walk at Wag Creek. I think that counts as one word. Fun. Leeches. Scary. Freedom. Solwyn. That's great. Thanks, everyone. I hope that was kind of fun and a little way to get out of our heads this morning. And oh, we're just having a few more come in here. Yeah, this is just to give us a little break from probably our usual everyday things that we're doing. So I know it takes a bit of time, but thanks for having fun and doing it. I'm just going to give a, there we go, another late addition. Okay, I'm going to hop into our next portion, which is more about a little brief overview of the project and then some updates on where we've gotten to. Because a lot of you are pretty familiar with the project and some of you may be a little bit less familiar, we're definitely going to do this at a little bit of a faster pace. So for those of you that aren't as familiar with the project or haven't been at one of our meetings, feel free to ask some questions in chat about little clarifications, or again, don't forget to use the Slido Q&A section. Okay, so resilient waters. So this project is all about identifying key opportunities to modify flood control infrastructure from Richmond Delta all the way to Hope, as it should say, to allow fish passage along the Fraser River. And we are focusing particularly on the Fraser River. And why is to restore habitat and migration routes for salmon and help communities manage and adapt to climate impacts like flooding simultaneously. The work really began because of some work that Watershed Watch Salmon Society undertook with their Connected Waters campaign. And they're identifying of 156 flood control structures along the Fraser River, including floodgates, flood boxes, and pump stations. And they were recognizing and realizing and hearing from a lot of folks that these structures were really impeding access to a lot of salmon habitat that is crucial, especially considering that the Fraser River is one of the most prolific salmon rivers on the planet. This problem seemed ripe for working to solve. And it also had this confluence of a lot of different, particularly municipalities, but all sorts of infrastructure owners that are going to need to update their flood control infrastructure because of impending climate change impacts. So it has this dual overlapping purpose. A little bit of background: when this project was first getting started out, the BC SRIF, the Salmon Restoration and Innovation Fund, folks did approach Watershed Watch to basically recommend some shovel-ready projects where they could start to make some of these upgrades. And Watershed Watch, the folks there, Lena and Aaron in particular, said we need to take a step back from this and think about where that money would be best spent, and think about what infrastructure could be upgraded that would have the best effects for salmon habitat and for reducing this flood risk. And so in doing so, as their conversations went on, they approached Tides Canada to host this project. And so that is how Tides Canada gets involved and why it is a Tides Canada project, but it is a very much a collaborative project amongst all of these many groups. So the goals of the project are to restore and revitalize salmon migration routes and habitat in the Lower Fraser Valley. And then this, like I mentioned before, to protect communities from flooding and future climate change impacts. There's a few ways it's going about doing this, but primarily to study flood control infrastructure and their affected waterways and salmon stocks through desktop analysis, literature reviews, and then also a detailed field work program. So Kerwood Lydell and Patrick Lilly is the lead of that team, is mainly working on the desktop analysis aspect of things. And then Mike Pearson of Pearson Ecological is leading the fieldwork program. We are also, a heavy part of that is also engaging and collaborating with all sorts of different groups that are represented here today. And we're doing that with support from Watershed Watch Salmon Society, as well as we're working with LFFA in terms of guidance on approaching First Nations of the Lower Fraser Valley. Just a little bit of a brief timeline. So we're basically at April now, so we've done a bunch of work to identify all of the opportunities, and Patrick will say a lot more about that, and developed a short and long list. Through the spring and summer, we'll be continuing to do some field work and engagement, though obviously that is impacted by the COVID crisis right now. Then the plan is in September to be analyzing data and aligning priority sites in that September to November period, and then producing a recommendation report for sites and some of the work that could be done at them in December. And then producing a work plan for how we would support those sites to have solutions implemented on them. And these parts is really where we hope that many of you will be able to come in and help guide our project to help us understand how we can best make these sites and these solutions successful. So a bit about some of the engagement work that we've done. So this is more an update on some of the engagement aspects. We had our first advisory meeting on January 23rd. Many of you were there. Some of the big themes that came up are what habitats and species are being prioritized. Is it floodplain? Is it upstream? Are we prioritizing Chinook, migrating or residents? Sturgeon, so what species, that kind of thing. A lot of talk about how is this project connecting to other projects and reducing the overlap, and how can they share information better with each other. What are the related projects, funding initiatives, and gaps that people are seeing locally and elsewhere? What are some fieldwork considerations? The best indicators, how and when to collect, what solutions exist and how effective are they? Some are simple solutions and some are expensive, and this still remains in a mystery in a lot of ways. And then some talk about framing of this project, to be honest about the project's potential and what it actually offers. Don't oversell it and don't undersell it. So we've taken that to heart and really thought a lot about what exactly are we offering through this project, and what is the potential, because it does have a lot of potential, but we want to be honest with you about what its capacity is and what we can actually offer. And we did have a couple of meetings with First Nations that invited folks. The first meeting was kind of an upriver meeting that was hosted by Chiacton, and then a downriver meeting hosted by Coquitlam. Some of the big themes that emerged from those two meetings was how does this project fit into a bigger picture, and how is it connecting to other projects and impacts. Some frustrations about how DFO funding is allocated generally can feel kind of piecemeal, so really put extra onus on us to understand how this project is fitting into the bigger picture. A lot of talk about how respecting knowledge and data sharing, how it can be done in a good way, and that this has been abused in the past, especially from an Indigenous knowledge perspective, and the importance of creating trust and good agreements to respect these. The idea of involving elders, youth, and other community members as well. There was a lot of good talk about how the diversity of voices and the importance of continuing traditions, as well as bringing younger voices in. So that was really taken to heart. And generally that most folks that were at the meetings were very supportive and excited about the project. And we were also very excited to hear about all the amazing work that has already been done or is underway that we can learn from all these communities. And we spent a lot of time also looking at maps and the range of sites and their histories and contexts. So there is so much to learn about each one of these sites and their histories and contexts, and some of the solutions that are available there. Just a few other quick updates from our project that is more kind of looking forward in terms of engagement beyond the continued engagement that we hope to do with each of you around these sites. I'm eager in particular to host a meeting with other stewardship groups to coordinate project info sharing. So I should say that I've got a survey feedback form that I hope you'll all fill out. And so it'll ask a question about whether you have interest in participating in these particular sessions. So that is the first session I'd like to host, or I'm happy to host. The second meeting, planning a solutions workshop that would invite all of you, plus folks from Washington and Oregon, some other people from Eastern Canada that we met at the adaptation conference. And so, yeah, we'd like to have all of you there and talk about potential solutions. And then another aspect that we're exploring is the idea of developing some infographics and visualizations of problems and solutions with the UBC Coastal Adaptations Lab and Case Lockman there. Yeah, so in some ways these meetings are to address some of those concerns that we were hearing about in the other meetings that we were having, and recognizing this is only a small part of that, but just wanted to keep you posted that those are some of the ideas that we're pursuing. And then Mike, I'm gonna find you and unmute you, or unless you can do it yourself. And Mike Pearson is going to give us a little bit of an update about field work and what's going on there. Mike, do we have you? Oh, here we go. Okay, you are now unmuted, Mike.
Okay, thank you.
There we go.
Good morning, everyone. Well, like so much else in the past month, field work has been derailed. We were scheduled to start on March 16th. We actually managed to get into the field, but literally as we set our first trap, we were on Catesy land and working with Mike Leon from Catesy. We got a call from the band office that, because March 16th was, of course, the day when Trudeau came on television and sort of started talking about distancing and the need. So we were thanked for our work and politely asked to leave, which I understand. And so we're thought about that and decided that we would postpone field work probably until after freshet. I mean, it's a lot of, with the field crew, there'd be just a lot of travel involved up and down the valley, as you'll see later with the sites, and which is certainly not a good idea. And it would really, we would not be able to work with all the partners we envisioned, particularly Indigenous technicians, watershed watch volunteers, and which would impact what we could accomplish in the field as well. So at the moment, I'm hoping to get out, just probably myself, during freshet to get photographs and water quality measurements inside and outside dikes, and then probably start field work. It's the main part of the field work after freshet. But of course, that's all dependent on the situation evolving in the next couple of months. And and no one can say how that's going to go. So that's about all I have.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Thanks for that update. And yeah, it's a bit strange that this is the first that we're really talking about this in a more earnest way. Of course, there's lots of ways that COVID will be impacting our ability to carry on, but this is in particular one piece of the project that will be, I would say, extra impacted.
Yeah. I could add, I guess that we do have options, right? And that there's about 80 days, so 4 months of field work scheduled. So we were hoping to get, one of the reasons we were hoping to get out in April was to sort of try and catch Chinook in particular, the earlier Chinook coming downstream. But we could still, but the most important part of the project is looking at the habitat inside the dikes that would be opening up and sort of assessing the value of that. That can be done at other times of the year. So if we were to start in July or August, we could still finish in this field season. We routinely work until late November, early December on other projects. And even if that fails, we could split the field season and do sort of some of it late summer or fall this year, and then pick up spring next year. So there's a variety of ways that we can be flexible and get this work completed.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. That's great. Yeah, and we're really appreciating that Mike has so much experience and knowledge and ability to be able to adapt the project in a way that will help us keep this project on course and still get the right kind of data and that we need to kind of confirm some of these sites. And so thanks, Mike. Going on, let's see here. Oh yeah, so I've just got the audience Q&A slide coming up here. So if you have had any questions, we have it open. So maybe this is just a time to remind you that the slido.com Q&A is open. For those of you that have joined more recently, you can go to slido.com and join at the event code salmon. And that is a place where you can put in questions and answers. So yeah, please feel free to do that. We're going to move on to our next section with Patrick, who is going to give us an update on where things are at in terms of doing the opportunity identification. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Patrick, and he's going to do a screen share of himself. Let me just find you as well. There we go.
Am I unmuted?
Yes, there you are.
And can everybody see the slide deck?
I don't think we can see, or I can't see it.
Okay, maybe I selected the wrong screen here. I did.
Nice.
Can everyone see it now?
Yeah.
Good, okay. Good morning, everyone. I am grateful of how many people have joined us this morning, given the situation we find ourselves in these days. It's great to have so much interest in this project. And as we think about implementing, I think, some of these project priorities, it's really going to take a team effort. So thank you to everyone who's showing an interest in this project, and we look forward to following up to chat further individually about some of the project opportunities that I'm going to talk about this morning. So I'm going to give an update on the project opportunity identification and prioritization process that KWL, Kerwood Lyle, my company, has been leading. I do want to highlight that this has been a collaborative effort, so very much the folks at Tides and at Watershed Watch, as well as Mike and Pearson, have been a part of this process. So while we're the study leads, by no means are we the only ones who are contributing to this process. So my outline for the little bit of time that I'm going to be speaking today is to firstly review the types of flood infrastructure and projects that we are looking at that are sort of included under the umbrella of this project. I'll briefly sort of describe where we're at in terms of the process to identify and prioritize specific project opportunities. I'm going to present out a preview of the draft shortlist of projects that we've arrived at to date and used to prioritize the sites for field work that Mike and his crew was planning to undertake and will still undertake, but with a little less certainty on the timing. And then I'll talk about some of the next steps for this project in terms of where we're going to go next after this meeting. So, just a reminder what this project is really trying to achieve. We know that the Fraser River floodplain was once an extensive network of nursery areas for wild salmon, for trout, and other important fish species. I know sturgeon was mentioned earlier. There's some fish species at risk as well that exist within the Lower Fraser. And so these habitats in the lower 160 plus kilometers of the river were really important and remain important nursery areas for wild salmon. So these range from things like tidal marshes and tidal channels near the mouth, the estuary of the river, to some of the lowland tributary streams that supported spawning and rearing salmon populations. And then some of the larger side channels, sloughs and off-channel wetlands and seasonally flooded islands and forests that provide important habitats at certain times of the year for migrating salmon that are moving down the Fraser and out into the open ocean. So it's really, this project is really about looking at how flood infrastructure has impacted these habitats and what we might do throughout this area to try and begin to restore some of the floodplain functions for fish and fish habitat that previously existed and that are now behind some of these structures. So again, we're focused on flood control infrastructure and their impacts on fish and fish habitat. And so these are the types of structures we're interested in, things like flood boxes and gates. This is an example of a flood box from Pitt Annington Marsh. Drainage pump station, that's the drainage pump stations, that's the Yorkson pump station on Yorkson Creek in Langley, as well as dikes. So all of these types of structures and their variations that provide flood protection to Fraser Valley, but also have the potential to impede fish access, to alter the physical, chemical, and biological habitat conditions that are present in the floodplain areas behind them, and to impair some of the natural floodplain functions like, food production, connectivity between riparian areas and aquatic habitats. All these structures have the potential to impact both the access of fish and the habitat conditions themselves. And when we are looking at identifying project opportunities, we're really looking across a range of project types and scales. So this is just a little summary of the types of projects that, again, we're looking at as possible interventions to address some of these impacts of these structures. So with respect to flood box, there are minor flood boxes, there are minor interventions we might do, such as modifying trash racks or grills on these flood boxes, modifying existing gates that are on the flood boxes, or even changing the operational regime of flood boxes if they're more of a manually controlled structure. And then major projects related to flood boxes could include things like upgating the gates, so to like a side-mounted, self-regulating or a controlled gate. So these would be gates that are generally known to be more conducive to fish passage and allowing more exchange of between the river and some of these areas inside the floodplain or inside the flood control infrastructures that can support fish. In some rare cases, we may actually be able to remove gates or replace entire flood boxes that may present unique impediments to fish passage as well. Similarly, on the pump station side, it could be something as simple as, again, modifying trash racks or grills, installing fish screens on pump intakes, or changing the operational regimes of that pump station, to more major projects such as upgrading projects or updating pump stations to a different type of pump that would be more fish friendly, reconfiguring things like the pump discharges, which may present a mortality risk to salmon, to juvenile salmon, or providing even a specific bypass structure to facilitate fish passage through an existing pump station. So this might be something like a bypass pump or a fishway through a pump station. As well, there is the dikes themselves. So again, the dikes separate floodplains from the river, and so we're looking at opportunities where there might be secondary dikes. So these are dikes that don't provide the primary flood protection for an area, where it might be possible to breach them to restore fish access or connectivity between the floodplain and the river or a creek. In some cases, there's also other river training structures that exist along the Lower Fraser River that we may be able to look at modifying as well to enhance or restore fish passage. And then in terms of the big picture, major projects with dikes where the opportunities exist, we might be able to look at setting back existing dikes from the riverbank or even breaching the primary dike. And again, these would be very rare cases. These are larger projects of a much, projects of a much larger scale. So those are the sort of range of projects that we're considering as part of this study. Those of you who were at the first advisory committee meeting will have seen a figure similar to this before. So this is sort of our, the way we see the process for identifying project opportunities as a multi-step filtering process. So starting with sort of the range of flood protection infrastructure that exists around the Lower Fraser Valley. From some of Watershed Watch's work, we know there's at least 156 sites, and some of our mapping work to date indicates that number is probably quite a lot harder. There's a lot of sites that aren't represented on some of the current inventory maps. From that larger inventory of infrastructure, we are identifying a subset of those for initial screening and field reconnaissance, and most of that field reconnaissance has happened already to date. That targeted list was, we aimed for about 30 to 40 sites, and I'll speak in a second about how many sites we've actually identified in that initial screening process. From that, what we call the long list, we want to identify a shorter list of sites, and these are sites and projects where we want to do more detailed field data collection and feasibility studies. And so that's really what Mike and his crew will be focused on, as well as the further work of KWL to look at the feasibility of particular solutions at some of these sites. And then the sort of final product of this study will be a final list of priority projects to recommend for implementation, hopefully in phase 2 and another round of funding of the project. So these are the criteria that we've developed as for use in sort of the project identification and prioritization process. Really, this project sits at the intersection of 3 broad categories of criteria. So the ecological criteria, so understanding the value of some of these habitats for fish species and salmon in particular. So some of the criteria under the ecological category would be the specific fish populations and species that are likely to benefit. the amount and types of habitat that would be reconnected or restored through undertaking a specific project, and understanding the existing condition of that habitat that's currently blocked by that structure and its recovery potential. So what would restoration do to improve the habitat for salmon as well? So ecological criteria are definitely a primary consideration in terms of the project identification and prioritization process. We also recognize that there are other criteria that are important. So on the engineering side, obviously, we need to understand whether some of these modifications are feasible from an engineering perspective. That involves, understanding the operation of the infrastructure and how we can modify it and maintain the level of flood protection that the structure is providing. So not reduce or not increase the risk of a particular location or community to flooding. We also recognize that, on the engineering side, one of the things that is important is that some of these projects are larger projects and they're unlikely to be pursued alone as a standalone project. And so they're understanding how some of these upgrades may fit in with other planned upgrades and complement other planned upgrades to flood protection infrastructure. We know that a lot of the infrastructure in the Lower Mainland doesn't meet the sort of current flood protection standards that are set by the province for protecting communities, and so that presents an opportunity to leverage those upgrades to complete some of the potential upgrades as well. We also want to understand, are the projects that we're undertaking going to be resilient to climate change? So as the climate changes, as sea levels rise, are these projects going to remain benefit to fish and to salmon? And then obviously the cost to construct and make these modifications is a criteria for selection as well, in a world with limited dollars and resources to be able to implement projects. And then also on the sociocultural side, there's things like understanding the potential of how incorporating the cultural significance of some of these sites, particularly for First Nation communities that have lived and derived resources from along the river. Understanding sort of, are there certain sites that are higher priority for those communities, and factoring that into the project identification and prioritization process. As well, we know that implementing projects will take the support of owners of these of this infrastructure, and so understanding the political support that exists for implementing particular projects. Understanding sort of how these structures interact with the adjacent land use and whether there's compatible land use for changes that might allow sort of these changes to be made, or whether that presents an impediment to changes. And then there are a variety of social and economic co-benefits that could be derived from this project. I know one of the things we've been talking about are these types of projects that should be prioritized at this time to boost the economy while also providing opportunities for fish resource enhancement and environmental enhancement. So those are the types of criteria we are using as part of the project identification and prioritization process. I also wanted to just talk about a subtle shift in terminology. So we started out on this project talking about a prioritization framework and developing a prioritized list of projects. One of the things we've realized is that as we sort of develop a list of priorities, we recognize that this is going to be a continuously evolving process, and there's no we will never arrive on a final list that represents the priorities of in perpetuity. And so what we have sort of done to evolve our thinking is to really think about this process, rather than being a process to identify as a prioritized list, to really identify a list of priority project opportunities. So it's a subtle shift in terminology, but I think what it does is tries to embrace the fact that the priorities will always be constantly evolving in terms of potential projects. And we want to highlight ones that are currently the higher priority, but also recognize that we're going to be identifying projects that may not currently make the priority list, but would still be important to implement in the future. And so this process of identifying potential projects and prioritizing them is a continuous work in progress that will be hopefully carried on beyond the timeline of this project as well. So just delving a little bit more into this process that we're undertaking and the steps involved, we've really divided it into 4 steps. Again, if you think back to the slide of that filtering process and that funnel, these represent those different levels of the funnel. So step 1 is really the inventory and mapping phase, and the bullets below this flowchart here describe the products at each stage. So step 1, the inventory and mapping phase, we're hoping to produce an interactive online map. We're working on producing an interactive online map that will share the results of the inventory and all of the information that we're gathering across all of the flood control infrastructure in the Lower Fraser River. And this will really be a resource and a legacy of this project that we want to leave for, again, for future use beyond the life of the project. We've undertaken an initial screening phase, and this was to get to our long list of sites, and this will produce an information summary table on all of those sites on the long list that we considered at this initial screening phase, and some of the details that we collected on the various criteria that were discussed in the previous slide. The detailed screenings phase, so this is what we've been working on over the last month and a half, is taking that long list down to a shorter list of sites to prioritize for field work and further feasibility work. And we hope to produce a set of project fact sheets out of that process. And then we'll be embarking shortly on the detailed assessment phase. So this is the collection of field data through with Mike's crew, as well as further work on the feasibility and eventually arriving on our final list of priority sites. So again, I think I've touched a little bit on this already, but step 1, this inventory and mapping phase, the graphic here is an example of the map that we're producing. So this is one of the reaches of the Fraser River and an example of some of the data that we're collating and collecting and adding to this project opportunities map. Really, it's focused on both the flood control infrastructure, but also the ecological information that we're collecting on the habitats and watersheds that are behind this flood control infrastructure. So this includes stock status and abundance. It also includes detailed watercourse mapping where it exists, boundaries of watersheds and drainage areas that feed into some of these structures. And also, if it's available, information on habitats, conditions, and trends. And so part of this process is to do QA, QC on the data, really verify its completeness and its accuracy. We also recognize that some of the data that is out there is out of date as sites see upgrades and changes. And so we're trying to make those updates for changes we know have occurred. And also to facilitate discussions around, changes to these sites, also determining their ownership status. So who owns them, controls them, manages them. In the initial screening phase, it was really focused on sort of a review of existing maps and air photo information, a desktop review. And a large part of this was using the existing knowledge and expert opinions of our project team to determine which sites should make it on the list. We also tried to identify reports and studies where previously recommended projects had emerged, and to make sure that those were on the long list as well for additional discussion and work to look at them as possible projects. Here is an example of the end result of a meeting we had back in January or February, where we worked through the whole study area in terms of the different watersheds and flood control infrastructure and and marked up our comments on those structures, what was behind them, what could potentially be done to adjust them. So this is an example of the type of process that we undertook. And this process, I think total now we have 67 potential projects that we identified and looked at in this initial screening phase. So actually much more than the 30 or 40 sites we had originally intended as part of this phase. And then in terms of the detailed screening, so we did, before COVID hit in mid-March, we did manage to do 6 field days with our team in February and March to get out to actually view as many of the sites on the long list as possible in person. And so this is some examples of some of our field visits we did. So this is the mouth of that's the flood box at Agassiz Slough, I think in the top left there. That's Mike and Al Johnson. This is one of the sloughs on Nikoman Island in the lower left, where there's a dike that crosses the slough. And this is Mike on a rainy day taking water quality information from just upstream of a pump station in Mission. And so with some of this initial sort of field reconnaissance information, we had follow-up discussions of potential project benefits, of their restoration potential. We also wanted to identify any potential things that could be showstoppers for a project. So this would include things like, basic things like, do we have access? Is there, favorable access to a site for construction, or for landowners who would allow access to these sites for work? And also identify what I called accelerators. So is there any other complementary reason that might mean that this project could be moved forward in an accelerated fashion? So from the longer list of 67, we identified a short list of 20 candidate sites for more detailed assessment, which I will present to you in a second. And then finally, this is the stage which we hope to begin soon, sort of the detailed assessment phase. So this is the field data collection, looking more at the engineering data and the feasibility of projects, and also ongoing discussions that we continue to have with the owners, with First Nations communities that are whose territories have been impacted by these structures and in which these projects would occur, and other stakeholders as well that would have an interest or be affected by projects. Does anyone have any questions at that stage about process before I jump into the presenting the draft shortlist?
And I just say, if you do have questions, please go and take this opportunity to pop them in the Slido. I know it seems, what's the word for it? Like draconic, but if we open it up to everybody off mute, then we could have a crazy situation. So use that slido.com Q&A thing right now.
Okay, so there is Dan, should I field the questions?
Sure, yeah, if you're happy to do that.
Okay, so I see there's one question there. In the work you have done inventorying dikes, have you identified orphan dikes separately? So yes, we have the information on which dikes are identified as orphan dikes in the Lower Fraser River, and those had been highlighted at a previous advisory committee meeting as being potential sites for projects, given that their management is currently, I guess, a little less clear than other sites. And so we have those sites, and we'll be representing them on our project opportunities map. Any other questions? Or people waiting in suspense for the list of projects? So I see another question about orphan dikes from an anonymous person. So the question is, would orphan dikes be more complicated to address? I think there is potential that they could be more complicated, although the fact that they're orphan dikes means that they also need to find, in some ways, a home for management, who is going to manage them, and that often is associated with understanding sort of what is the status of that infrastructure and what upgrades might need to occur. So I know there is a study that Fraser Basin Council is leading that is looking at the status of some of the orphan dikes in the province, and that includes some sites in the Lower Fraser River. And that we will use that as a basis for sort of understanding what upgrades might be already prescribed in some of these areas, and where there might be opportunities to piggyback, I guess, on some of those proposed upgrades. And those also present, I think, opportunities to leverage well, to possibly use the fish passage as a way to maybe accomplish multiple objectives for projects. So, and I think one of the breakout groups we're going to discuss are those cost leveraging opportunities, but I'd be interested to hear people's thoughts on whether there are opportunities to leverage costs around orphan dikes, because one of the issues around orphan dikes is there's, without a sort of an organization or an agency leading management of those sites, they can fall through the cracks in terms of funding for upgrades. Dan, do you want to address the question about how we're connecting with infrastructure owners?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, this is a good time to do that. Basically, what we're intending to do is really that we understand all of these sites have a lot of work, and a lot of you have been doing work behind each of these projects and know a lot more about each of these individual projects. So our intention today is not really to get into a discussion of individual sites, because that, I mean, every one of these sites could have hours and hours of conversation about them. So our intention today is to give a broad update, and what we want to do is connect with you to understand these sites better. So we're already kind of connecting with municipalities and the First Nations around the more intricate details of this short list of sites, and using also that as an opportunity to have a second look at some of the other sites that we didn't include, in case we're missing something. So basically that's the process. We'll be intending to connect with you about these sites over the coming next month or two, and add that information into our context, and then work to have some meetings with the infrastructure owners as well. And I just wanted to use that as an opportunity to also let you know that we do have a survey feedback form. So in case you're just needing to leave very soon, I'll be sending out a feedback form that has a list of our short list here and asks you if you want to be involved in future meetings about which of these individual sites you'd like to be involved in, and also an option to add others that you'd like to discuss further. So that will be in a feedback form going back to you. So for today, we're not, we'll definitely capture this Q&A, so I'm glad that you're adding in things about individual sites, but we won't be addressing conversations about that. Yes, and I'm seeing a couple other questions. What I'd like to do is, I think I'd like to say, let's parking lot the orphaned dikes for a conversation like Patrick was mentioning. Maybe we can parking lot that to the funding and leverage conversation, and then the Watershed Watch Disconnected Waters Atlas is going to be useful for this project. Yes, indeed. This project is very much born of that work with the Watershed Watch Disconnected Waters Atlas. Rob Knight from Community Mapping Network did share the link to that further up in the group chat, but I can also share that again. I could also mention that Riley Finn at UBC is also developing a model that builds on this work as well in an algorithm. I won't get too much into the work that Riley's doing because it's complex, but I'm sure Riley could probably share a link to his work in the chat as well to everyone. And so I'm just conscious of time here. We're at 10:15, so I'm just gonna say, Patrick, if you don't mind, just wrapping up this portion, and then we'll have a break.
Okay. Can everybody see my slides again, or still see them? Yes?
Yeah.
Okay. So I did, to end off here, I did want to give you a preview of the draft shortlist that we're working with in terms of starting to think about detailed assessment. I did want to say that, you know, this is meant to be a work in progress. So if your site is not on here, don't get too upset at this stage. We wanted to develop a shortlist to be able to then facilitate conversations with individuals about these particular sites and whether they represent the best sites within your municipality, or if you see other opportunities that may not be on the list. So again, we're not going to get too much into the rationale for individual sites inclusion on the list today. Well, we're not getting into the rationale at all. But we want to keep this very high level. But we did want to give you a bit of an overview of the sites that are currently on our short list, that we're working towards. And in order that I think it can help you identify whether there are sites that you might want to be involved in conversations about moving forward. So there are 20 sites on the list. I think this slide tries to show that they're really organized, I think, into 6 different project types. So we have 7 different projects that are really focused on reconnection of historic sloughs and side channels that have been cut off by dikes or causeways as well. And so these are sites where when dikes were built, in some cases, you know, back 60, 70 years ago, the dike was built right across the mouth of the slough and its connection to the Fraser River, and either at one or at both ends of the slough. And so these and there is currently no connection between that slough and the river. So there's no flood box, no pump station connecting flows. So these are 7 different there's 7 different projects that are this scenario. There are 4 projects where there are sloughs that have this sort of dike scenario, but there is currently a flood box through that dike that separates the slough from the river, and or a pump station. And so these represent opportunities to potentially make modifications to those flood boxes to restore fish passage into those sloughs. The third, there are 5 different projects that are looking at fish passage upgrades associated with pump stations on tributary creeks. So these would be, rather than being side channels or sloughs of the Fraser River, these are tributary creeks that drain from upland areas through the lowlands and into the Fraser River through some sort of flood control infrastructure, usually a pump station and or a flood box. And there are 5 different projects in that category. And then there are a number of projects that are totally different than the others. So one is looking at changes at Hatzick, the outlet of Hatzick Lake, in terms of the operational regime of the flood box, a secondary dike breach at East Skowlitz. This is in Agassiz. and sorry, that's not in Agassiz, that's in Harrison Mills, I should say. And then 2 larger scale projects which look at opportunities, potential larger, longer term project opportunities to implement setback dikes. And so these are in existing protected and conservation areas where there might be opportunities to set back the dike and restore some floodplain connectivity and increase the area of habitat available to salmon. So Larissa Lowe, my colleague at KWL, helped put together a couple of maps of these sites. So this is the western portion of the Lower Fraser River. So the blue sites represent sites on the short list, which we've prioritized for field work that were on the previous slide. You can also see there are a few sites shown in red. Those are actually reference sites. So as part of our study and the field work, we wanted to include sites that represent sites that have good connections to the Fraser River. They may have flood infrastructure around them, but they are well connected. And some of these sites have also been previously used as reference sites in other studies, West Creek being an example of a site like that. So we've identified 2 sites in the Lower Fraser River in addition to the sites for more detailed field work that represent potential sites where we could do modifications. We've also identified 2 reference sites as well. And then you'll also identify some sites, or you can also see some additional sites shown in that orangey yellow category. So these are project opportunities that have been identified and included in our shortlist, but are not sites that we're prioritizing for field work at this time, either because there's a lot of existing information at these sites, or there is limited value to the fieldwork because of the nature of the particular site. So that's the western portion. And then these are the sites in the eastern portion. You can see those sites and the types of projects represented. And again, we have a reference site, which is on just upstream on the Harrison River from the confluence with the Fraser at Squawcum Creek. And this is a site, again, that doesn't have flood control infrastructure, which we propose to use as a reference site. So again, these sites have been identified through this multi-step process. We will be sharing this list in the near future with you and asking for detailed feedback. At this stage, we're not so much looking for feedback on the specific sites or issues, but we just wanted to share where we're at with the process and know that, and let you know that we will be following up for further discussions on an individual basis in terms of the current state of some of these sites and talk more about the opportunity that exists at these sites. And then just in terms of next steps, so just to finish off here, we want to finish the online interactive map that we've started, and particularly on that map, highlight these long and shortlisted sites so that we can share them with you through that map. We are currently engaged in, as we said, discussions with some of the owners of these structures, First Nations and key stakeholders, and we will continue to have those discussions with you. We may make further refinements to the shortlist through that process. We'll be developing project fact sheets for the shortlisted sites that will be highlight what is being proposed at each site, the rationale for that particular project, and what we think the benefits will be. And then as well, we'll be continuing on with the field data collection as the current situation allows, and doing more work on the feasibility of these projects from an engineering perspective. And with that, I'll wrap up my section, and I guess, is there a bit of time for further questions if there are any?
I think I basically looked at the Slido, and there is a question about some solutions. I'm going to kick that question to the breakout discussion on the solutions. And this is a great time. Thanks, Patrick, for sharing all that. If you do want to ask more questions, we'll have some more time later in the session after the breakout groups for those questions. Or you can always email us and we'll get a response back to you. But right now, I know probably many of you are eager for a break from the screen time and the sitting. So What I'd like to do is just tell you what the breakout sessions are going to be. So let me just pop my screen on there. There we go. So I just need to go back a few. Yeah, so we have a few breakout sessions, and I do have it in the Slido as well. So if you want to go and pick your breakout session, and please do include your name so that this is basically so I can put you in those breakout sessions manually. So if you go look at your slido.com thing with the enter the event code salmon, you'll see the breakout sessions in front of you. Pick at least 2 that you would want to participate in. And now I'll just give you a little bit of an idea of what they are. And then we'll have a 10-minute break. We can't afford 15 minutes, unfortunately, because the timeline has gotten a bit behind us. But so the sessions are the future of resilient water. So how will the project best support solutions and making them happen going forward? Right now, what we're offering is more or less field work and some engineering feasibility, but the future of the project is really, in many ways, kind of in your guys' hands. We need help understanding how we'll best be able to support those solutions. So then next is taking a look at all of these overlapping crises, the COVID, flooding, and salmon, all at the same time. And what are some of those impacts, and what are some of the opportunities that are potentially coming out of that? Next is funding and cost leveraging options that Patrick mentioned before, both now, what is available now, and what is available post-COVID. Then a little session on better collaboration. How can we better collaborate as a group to share information? This could be more particular to NGOs, but this could also include anybody that's interested in how to do better information sharing. We are also particularly interested in how people want to do meetings around individual sites. Would they prefer us to connect with them one-on-one, or would they prefer to have larger meetings with all the interested parties at once that have an interest in that? Okay, folks, it looks like most of you are back at your desk, so I think we will hop right in to giving a little bit of a roundup of what our meeting sessions were like. I will, or any concerns before we get started on that? Anything anybody wants to bring up? You can always pop it in the chat. Okay, I will begin. So my group was the future of resilient waters. So it was really asking this question of how can this project work to support communities and solutions going forward. And it was a pretty open question, and we had some really great conversation. So one was around kind of continuing to do what we're already doing. I would say some of the major themes are continuing to provide this research and monitoring, because that is very helpful to some groups, especially municipalities who need justification to push the projects up their ranks to get further funding and more attention, because these projects, these solutions are always in competition with other municipal projects. So they need as much kind of context as they can have in order to highlight these projects and get them funded. And also an openness to not only just resilient waters, but an openness to partnering with academics for research on these kinds of projects. So also maybe a role to play for resilient waters in making sure that all the resources are connected within this problem area, including all the great resources that the Community Mapping Network has, the resources that Millie at BCIT has in terms of being able to provide some field research with students and that kind of thing. And I would probably say the same for SFU and UBC. So lots of opportunities for collaboration in general. I think that is also highlighted. There is a big concern about the lack of monitoring that happens at some of these sites after solutions go in. And so this is a much needed area to kind of continue to have this kind of research to see how these sites are actually performing. There was talk about the idea of, I guess in some ways this branches over into the better collaboration conversation, but could we have some kind of database or list that would make it easier for people to share information with each other, or just even know the context and organizations that are involved in the work? The answer to that is a little bit that it's always evolving. I think that one question for us, though, is that I'm adding it to our feedback form, is if you're willing to share your name and your organization, then I will make that available, and your contact information. I'll make it available to at least everyone that was invited to this meeting. And then we got into a conversation kind of about funding and the other challenges that are involved. So coming at it more from like what are the problems to be solved that we can come at. So there was a funding conversation talking about some of these bigger scale DMAF projects, what municipalities are already working on these, what aren't. And we got the sense that it would be a good idea to offer an opportunity for folks that are working on things like these DMAF projects of a higher scale even, or maybe everybody that's working on these solutions, to have an opportunity to share information about going through that process, kind of do that capacity building exercise of like kind of getting people up to speed on how to go through some of these funding processes. Yeah. And then we talked again about this thing that I mentioned earlier about having a solutions workshop, which is a bit related to the last one, but maybe this one be a bit broader and invite people from across potentially the world, because we have this unique opportunity right now with everybody being in Zoom land, that we could have a session purely about kind of what are the solutions, are they working, what is the evidence you have for how they are working or not, and that kind of thing. Yeah, so those were the big themes from our group, and thanks so much for everyone in my group for those comments. I'm going to pass it to Lena. Can I put you on the spot to report back on your conversation?
Yes, for sure. You can hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So yeah, we had a good conversation as well. So our focus was, how do we collaborate better? What are some things that we should be doing? What's been done before that's working? What's not working? And when it comes to individual sites, what are the best ways to do the to talk about those sites? So one of the things that came up at the beginning was, how could we collaborate better? Is perhaps sharing some of the outputs from the meetings that we had on the long list, just like sharing updates semi-regularly on what's going on with the core team meeting, with the core group, how decisions are being made. And also another idea was to create a one-pager of information and distribute it to First Nation communities in particular, so that we're making very clear what we're trying to do, how we plan to support salmon, the technical support, the technical work that's going into this, just to ensure that First Nation communities are aware of what's going on, and it'll be done in a more democratic way. The question around how can we approach info sharing and who's getting it right and wrong. So this led to some question about protocols. Is it like a general protocol that exists for the region, or is it nation by nation? And we had Stephanie from Sales on the call. So she said for them, it's actually on their website when it comes to information sharing, like what the protocols are. So at least there we should be just reading up on that and becoming more familiar because people are already putting it up on their websites. One thing so we also had Chief Mark Point from Skokale on the call, and he mentioned that it's really, really important to not view First Nations as another partner in this work, but rather to understand that their Aboriginal right to salmon kind of is supersedes a lot of the other, partner type conversations we tend to have. And we need to understand that and respect that when having a lot of these conversations about the knowledge that's being shared. He also made a really good point that the question we're asking is a bit universal. First Nation communities, he doesn't feel like they have the full technical capacity to participate in this very specific question, but rather this could be an opportunity to do more learning and sharing and helping to build that capacity within communities. So inviting First Nations to the table, not simply to share knowledge, but also to learn, and also for us to open up spaces for First Nation communities to learn about what they're already doing on reserve or in their territory, which I thought was a really good idea. So Dan, to add to that information, the solutions workshop that we're planning, perhaps in addition to that, we could host something where we're inviting First Nation communities and holding a sharing workshop so people can learn from each other from within the nation. One suggestion that came up about the future of rivers and waters, so not exactly better collaboration, but this did come up and it might be useful for you to know, is opportunity to collect all this data and have it available is really important so we can continue to identify additional projects down the line. The question about what is the First Nations role in this project, we've already discussed, and we reiterated the role through the field work and in the future through the restoration work as well. And again, it came up, just that opportunity to learn is really important. Yeah. One thing that was mentioned is not just invite political organizations from First Nations perspective to these meetings, but also to invite communities. For example, resource managers would be the people to identify and invite. Yeah. Did anyone else from our breakout, Better Collaboration Brainstorm, have anything to add? Yeah, then that's it.
Thanks, Lena. That's great. Sounds like a really good conversation. Can we throw it to the Fish Passage Solutions group? I think that would be maybe Patrick or Mike, or Mike.
Mike, did you want to go or do you want me to? Are you there, Mike? Okay, well, I guess that means I'm going. So we kind of went through the different infrastructure types and worked through a discussion kind of around the challenges of each of them. So we started by talking about flood boxes. One of the things we talked about was whether we've seen some of these other gate configurations work well. And one of the things that came out of that conversation was that a lot of the issues with flood boxes seems to be more of a operational issue than a technology issue. So it's that there's a lot of opportunities to manage these structures and the way they function throughout the year differently than we currently do. We have a very, we manage them for flooding as if flooding occurs 365 days a year. But the reality is that the flood window, particularly on the upper river, is during the freshet period, so more of a 60 to 90 day window. And so could we manage them differently and that would be a very low cost fix. So we see a need to work with operators and sort of managers of the infrastructure to kind of talk more about the operational side of things. We also, on the pump station side, we talked about how fish there's various levels of fish friendliness of pumps, but that it's not clear whether even pumps that are fish friendly are actually fish friendly. Depends on a variety of things. You know, it's the pumps themselves, but it's also things like where the pumps discharge and whether the, you know, if it's discharging onto rocks or a concrete apron, that can potentially cause fish mortality, even if the fish make their way through the pumps. There's just not a lot of information on the actual fish passage through these types of different pumps as well. So there needs to be more work there. We talked about how we think we could learn on some of the technology side from other jurisdictions, that there aren't a lot of great local examples of sort of pump stations where fish passage has been thought through fully within the design. And one of the issues that came up was around the management of debris and fish screens. And so whether fish screens could be implemented, but that debris becomes an issue. So how do you best, you know, design screens to manage the debris as well, and not cause fish passage issues with the way that the debris is managed, or fish kills as well, fish mortality from that. There's some examples. Betty shared an example of a site in at one location, I won't name, where the debris removal devices actually led to large fish kills. And then we also talked a little bit about dikes and about opportunities for setting back the dikes to allow more room for the river, and how those are expensive projects, but it would be good to encourage that over time as well. And we talked about how there may be opportunities to encourage fish passage or to create fish passage through dikes in certain locations. So not a full breach, but maybe installing flood boxes in through dikes as well. So there's an example of a number of sloughs or side channels where the dike currently has no structure allowing any sort of fish or water passage through the dike, and that's an opportunity. And that led to a conversation about Mariah Slough in particular, and how the Seabird has a 10-year, $50 million plan actually to look at restoring fish habitat in Mariah Slough, and that that is you know, looking at ways to create water passage through the upper end of the slough and opening up the upper end of the slough, really to flush out the habitat in terms of sediment and improve water quality, is a really key and important part of that plan. There was also the suggestion to put culverts on the list as well. So not just focus on flood boxes and pump stations, but you know, focus on replacing culverts as part of this mix. They can be as restrictive as some of these other structure as well. Did I miss anything?
You're good to me. I'm here now. Was muted early.
Okay.
Thanks for picking that up.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. Yeah, sounds like a good conversation and maybe a good lead into a potential future solutions workshop. One more group to go, adapting to the overlapping crises.
Sorry, that's me. All right, we had a really good conversation. So yeah, just wanted to say thank you to everyone who's in that group and was participating. I thought we went pretty deep and came up with some practical action items. So that's really awesome. That doesn't happen all the time. So our group was looking at, I guess, understanding some of the threats and opportunities with overlapping crises. So with COVID, as well as flooding, as well as the looming threat of climate change and the risks to our salmon, and I guess the already salmon crisis that we've had, or that we already have. what are the threats and opportunities amid all of these different things that are happening at the same time, and how do we move forward, and how do communities move forward with that? As we said, there are opportunities, but I think those opportunities are that there will be a stronger desire to do flood mitigation with economic stimulus. There will, as well as prioritize salmon, because they do make up a large section of BC's economy and Canada's economy, and other priorities as well. But the threats are that things will happen in a bad way. So infrastructure upgrades can be one of the things that we use to rebuild economies, but the danger is that our priority becomes singular. So for example, as the economy falls, there might be a push to do projects quickly to bring the economy back up, and that might mean that we're having an economic focus and not thinking about all the other things that, like fish, that we also want to think about and keep in mind when we're doing flood infrastructure projects. So losing sight of the other values that we might have. One of the suggestions was that the Resilient Waters Group might have to share the findings that we had widely, so with municipal governments or others, and be really proactive in how to get the opportunities that we found and the potential solutions that we found out there. We had questions about as well, who are the best champions that we could be talking to? Is that municipalities or First Nations, and how can we bring those voices together? As well, we talked about how COVID has been an example of how we can really look at prioritize other values, particularly human lives over the economy. And maybe there's a chance to take some of that thinking and move that forward and look at what other values are we also wanting to highlight or to keep as important rather than just the economy. And COVID has also highlighted how important green spaces are for a lot of people in green space protection. So projects, we might look into projects that restore water quality, or those projects might be highlighted more now. So it's looking at, I guess we discussed about how these things could present opportunities, but how there are also really large looming threats that, we might put aside these values even though they're becoming even though they're highlighted with people right now. So we thought about ways that we could get ahead of that, and one of that would be to discuss with certain funding programs to send out letters similar to as Watershed Watch has done in the past, or to specifically target groups who are doing current work right now. So looking, if we have a flood this year, looking at municipalities who will be redoing their flood plans, or for example, the province's response and how are we reviewing our emergency management acts and things like that, and targeting and sending out messages to those groups that are currently acting. The other thing we talked about was similar to what a lot of the other groups said, which is how can we prepare our communities and how can we provide them with what they need to move forward in a more green way. So looking at green infrastructure options, create a document of solutions and sources, and have, I guess, it's sort of an evolving or living list, or potentially also having a webinar so that they can ask different questions with people who have done this or people who have experience, so that they can learn about how to actually make these things come to life in their particular situation. One of the things we talked about was despair and dealing with many of the crises at the same time. So how we want to get people, I guess, interested or get people caring, but one of the things we really need to watch out for right now is that desperate thinking and despair might be something that will be holding people back or dragging people down. And so we really want to, and one of the benefits of this project is that it is presenting solutions potentially and opportunities. So just finding a way to really frame what we're doing in a bit of a positive way, and looking at it as opportunities and synergistic opportunities as well, and advancing reconciliation, things like that, in ways that, things that are all good, hoping to bring people up a little bit more. I think that's, the final thing we talked about was maybe we aren't the best ones to answer the question of what do communities need, and maybe this is a question that should go out to communities. And then finally, looking at incentivizing with our communications, and how do we incentivize municipalities to go forward with greener infrastructure or fish-friendly infrastructure. And maybe a way to do that is to really make it personal and look at people in the community, or people whose livelihoods are depending on the fish around this infrastructure, things like that. And then I think Erin's final comment, I hope you don't mind that I'm quoting you on this, is that we should really fight like hell to make sure that the economy is not the single priority moving forward after the COVID response. So I really like that. So thank you. Yeah, thank you everyone for sharing your thoughts.
Thanks so much, Jillian. That's great. Yeah, that sounds like a really good session. Yeah, awesome discussions. This is all very helpful for us. It really helps us kind of shift our courses and adapt the project all the way from big shifts to kind of little shifts of nuance. So this is all very helpful. And we'll definitely be pursuing a lot of these avenues around working to bring people together to learn more, build capacity, share lessons learned. I think that's one way that Resilient Waters can really add some value here beyond just providing opportunities for providing kind of the field work and the research side of things and the feasibility. So this has been really great. I really appreciate everybody coming today, hanging out, spending this much time with us. I know it's a lot. It's a lot to be in front of a screen. It's a lot to be kind of holding your singular focus. So again, I'll just like leave with a message that be kind to yourselves, be kind to each other. Thanks so much for everything today. I'm just going to share a little bit about kind of like the next steps for us so we can get out of here at noon. Oh, it just turned noon, so we're going to take the conversations today. We'll do a bit of synthesis work and then report back to you guys as soon as we can. One question we'll be asking, oh yeah, so we will have a feedback form. I'll link it right now, but I will also send it out by email. So if you really are feeling eager to fill it out now, feedback is always best right in the moment in some ways. So one of the questions will be about having a meeting either this summer or next meeting fall. We will try and have some other kinds of meetings this summer too around solutions and that kind of thing. The field work, we'll keep you posted on how that's going and what the adapting plans are. We hope to still be able to carry forward this year with a lot of it, as Mike alluded to. We'll keep working on this list and updating it. And we will be contacting you about if you're interested to talk about some of these individual sites and areas. Again, there is a question in the feedback form about which sites you would be interested to discuss more with us and with other folks. Yeah, and as I alluded to, some more meetings. Meetings. Zoom. Thanks everyone. Thanks for all your time. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll be in touch soon.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.